You're listening to Ordinary Eccentrics. I'm Courtney Lofton, and together we'll uncover the extraordinary lives of ordinary people. Let's hop into it.
So my name is Rockne O'Leary.
Thank you, Rockne O'Leary. I really want to just get the origin story to start off. Where were you born and raised?
So I'm born right outside of Philadelphia,
Okay.
and raised in Garnet Valley. So I've been pretty local my whole life. I went to Garnet Valley High School. I still live in the Glen Mills, Garnet Valley area now, um, and so stayed local all my life.
Nice. What's it like growing up in Philadelphia for anyone who didn't grow up in America or maybe listening from out of the country?
Um, so you know, I didn't grow up in the city,
Uh-huh.
but growing up around in this area, there's definitely it's definitely that Northeast kind of attitude and mentality. Like people are pretty gritty, blue collar,
Yeah.
um, hardworking, um, kind of people. And so like I definitely attribute to a lot of my characteristics for just growing up and being part of this area.
Yeah. And so are you from more of a small town, would you say, or how would you describe the place that you grew up in?
Yeah, like I guess back in the '80s, like Garner Valley was kind of like farmland a little bit, and now it's
Hmm.
like not at all. It's very built up. It's one of the, I would say, um, nicer places to live in like the Delaware County area.
Hmm.
Um, so at least from when I was a kid and first moving out here to now, like definitely a lot's changed. Definitely more populated now.
Yeah. Do you remember moving out or did you move out like as a baby?
So we moved to Garden Valley when I was like 6. Um,
Okay.
and I do remember it a little bit, not like vividly, but um, I remember it enough to be like, wow, things have definitely evolved over the last 20 25 years.
Well, I'm from Illinois, and it was like one of the places where like my mom went to the same high school that I went to. Everyone who is lives there is from there, their family's from there, like very much generational. Is it kind of like that?
Um, it's kind of like people. So I guess when my parents were kids, um, it was kind of like when my parents were kids and everybody that they kind of grew up with sort of migrated over to and kind of lives in like Garner Valley now, or
Okay,
different.
got it.
Yeah. So it seems like there's a progression of like a location, like as one area gets more populated, right? Then everything gets kind of pushed, if that makes sense.
Mm, yeah.
Um, and it seems to continue to be going that way.
And do you like the growth, or are you like would rather have it still kind of be the place you grew up in?
Um, I guess like yes and no,
Yeah.
I guess sometimes now, like I wish it was kind of like when I was growing up here. But at the same time, if it stayed like that, then I'd probably saying I wish it was a little bit more populated.
Yeah.
Um, so sometimes, but no, I like the way it's going, and I like being here. It's just it's a good place to live. It's a good place to live. Great school district. So like if and when I do have kids or anybody else has kids, like trying to move into this district is like it's a good school system. So it's definitely a great place to grow up.
Yeah. Nice. What was school like for you?
School's awesome. I mean, I never really like hated school.
Uh-huh.
And that was just because like went and you go, you played sports and I got to hang out with my friends all the time. And so
Nice.
like
What sports did you play?
I played all of them. So I was mainly, football, baseball, basketball growing up. Um,
Okay.
and
All
then
seasons.
all seasons, it never stopped. Um, and then as I got older, I ended up playing football in college, uh, and so football was kind of always my favorite sport. Um,
Yeah.
so everything kind of revolved around football, but I always played other sports though, because I think that's
Yeah.
important, especially as a kid.
Tell me more about like the college level of sports because I know that
So
gets really involved for people.
yeah, so I didn't play at like the big time Division 1. I played Division 3 football. So it's
Uh-huh.
it's still a full time commitment. But
Yeah.
and it is still serious.
So you're playing football. These
Yes.
three schools still competitive athlete at the collegiate level. So what I guess what was that like and what kind of led you to continue sport into college?
Um, it was. I mean, it was. I loved it, right?
Mhm.
So, um, it wasn't really anything different for me. There was no like, um, there was no going into it where like you go to college and then it's like, oh wait, I have all this schoolwork in college. Like, how do I balance? Do I need
Mhm.
to keep playing? Do I need to keep playing sport? I'm not on scholarship, right? Because Division 3, they don't give out any money to
Mm.
play,
Mhm.
and so like you're I guess essentially volunteering to play because you're not obligated by any financial incentive, right?
Right.
Um, and so you know it never like once really crossed my mind that I wasn't going to play just because I was in college and had school. I just loved playing football so much.
Yeah.
And
When playing sports in college is like committing to a full-time job on top of being in school.
yeah, like it was still once August came around, you still left and went to camp, and you still put all that
Mhm.
time in where like you'd have 2 days, you'd have a 3 hour practice, you'd be watching film, you would have meetings, right? You would be doing all that stuff. And so there is that time commitment with knowing that you're not getting any money to be on scholarship, or you're kind of just volunteering your time a little bit.
Yeah.
But and it is more than that. You do create like the bonds and the friendships, and there's nothing like being on a team, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, but I've been playing football since I was 5. So like by the time high school ended, it wasn't like, what am I going to do, right? If I stop playing
Yeah.
football, like I can't go to. What am I not going to play football anymore, right? And so
Yeah.
I was definitely, my number one goal was always to just continue to play football in college, whether no matter where it was, right? I would have played. I
Right.
would have played anywhere, just because football was like my passion.
Yeah. Do you still identify as an athlete, just being, especially like starting so young?
So I try to, yes. It's it took a while, like after I graduated college, to kind of, I guess, let go, right, and
Hmm.
realize like, hey, I'm never going to play football again. And I think a lot of athletes can relate to that feeling, right? Because
Yes.
we all love to compete and play, and we love the team sport bond and all of that. And but the reality is that not everybody's going to make it to the professional and be able to make a career out of playing sports, right?
Hmm.
Um, it's just an extremely difficult thing to do. Um, and so, once you graduate college and it's, say, over, um,
Hmm.
and if you've been playing something for so long, you definitely identify as a football player, right? And
Hmm.
once it's taken away from you, you're kind of, all right. What am I supposed to do? What do I get
Now
into?
what?
A lot of people put
Yeah.
that into work, and then maybe they put it all towards their job, and um, they have a successful career. But like sometimes it's just not the same. It's not as fulfilling, right? Um,
Yeah.
And so definitely for me, it took a couple years to figure out. It probably took like 4 or 5 years to figure that out, maybe, to get comfortable.
Yeah.
And that's there was just kind of how long it took for me to kind of get over that a little bit. Um,
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of I ran track for 1 year in college and I was able to quit, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, like for the first time since I was 12, I'm not an athlete anymore." And I was like rediscovering, like, or I guess discovering like a new identity. But
yeah,
people who play all 4 years, all through college, sometimes even 5 years with the redshirt season, end up leaving and struggle with the identity of who they are after college and after they're done playing their sport, and like what to do now. So like for those 4 years and after, how did you cope?
yeah. So like, I guess I tried to put it into uh, career. I would say like I thought,
Hmm.
um, I guess kind of like most kids. I thought like my degree was the route that I had to go. Um,
Hmm.
and so thinking like, okay, well, this is it. And trying to use that to connect with the same passion that I had for football, and they just didn't align with kind of
Hmm.
who I was and who I am. And so because I was a business and economics major, like I thought I wanted to do the finance thing and be like a financial advisor. And so
Hmm.
I went down that road, and I ended up sitting and trying to take the life accident and health tests, the Series 7 tests. I tried those things, and I failed all of them. Right, so I took the life accident and health test like 4 times, and I failed every single one. And not because I didn't study; I did study for it,
Yeah.
like I did put the time in to try and study, and I failed every single one. And then the Series 7, I studied for that too, and I failed that as well. But I don't necessarily think it's because I couldn't eventually pass them. I was just not interested in it. Right? It
Right.
didn't. It wasn't one of those topics or things that like got me out of bed in the morning. Where
Right.
like getting up and knowing that I get to, go out and train for football, like that was always getting me out of bed. Like it was never an issue to
Right.
wake up early and kind of do those things because it was like, all right, like I love doing this, even though it sucks sometimes, but it was never like an issue.
Right.
Um, and then, so like that was that. And then I continued to kind of just bounce around from job to job a little bit because I wasn't finding anything that I liked
Hmm.
um, and then what's funny is I ended up working in like accounting, in like a bookkeeping department at a law firm, and got kind of wrapped up with like, hey, maybe I want to be a lawyer, right? um,
Hmm.
and that was just me kind of being lost and not really knowing, you know, myself enough and where I wanted to go. And then so I did actually again. I studied and I took the LSATs and I did horrible. That I didn't get into any schools. I was like, what am I doing? And so like it took a while for me to figure out, and I messed it up a bunch of times. Uh,
Yeah.
but
Trial
then,
and error.
yeah, for sure. And then I eventually I eventually figured it out, which is great to end up doing what I'm doing now. Um, but would I be here now if I didn't make all those mistakes and like go through that time of like what the hell am I doing with my life?
Yeah.
Um,
And how would you know had you not tried?
exactly, yeah. So just not being afraid to kind of do all those things and then get, I guess say fail all the time
Yeah.
with that and like get that feedback. And also being able to have the acceptance that, hey, this is kind of what I've gone through and what I did, and it's not
Hmm.
working, it's not aligning. And so I guess especially as a young 24, 25-year old, um, I wasn't entirely, I guess, into my development emotionally and mentally like that. So,
Mhm.
you know, did have that kind of that ego talking right in your face, right?
Mhm.
And so it does make it a little bit harder to accept, hey, is this my reality? Like where am I at? I don't have it figured out. Um and so, once I finally kind of let go of that a little bit, things started to change.
And how did you go through that process of, I guess, self-awareness and realizing like the work of the ego and letting go of the past? Because I feel like so many people do think or like get their head set on a certain thing and then they're trying and failing and it's not working out, but then it ends up like banging your head against the wall, still trying to make it work. But you're able to shift and try other things. So can you talk more about that and like kind of what your mindset was like?
Yeah, there's I guess there's a couple. There's probably two big ones I would say. Um so I started to get into like personal development a little bit,
Mhm.
probably around 2000 like 17.
Mhm.
And at that time I was probably maybe 24 or 25.
Mhm.
um, and so I started to get into that a little bit, and I was definitely the typical, typical boy where wasn't very emotional, wasn't very empathetic, kind of closed off.
Mhm.
So I was very much like that kid, and not that I wasn't like kind or genuine or anything like that, but I was definitely wasn't emotionally open, I would say.
Yeah.
And so like I started to get into you know self development, um, then, and then I guess be a little vulnerable here for a minute
Mhm.
is I was in like a really long relationship from like 18 years old till about you know 25 or 26. So I was in like a 7-year relationship, right? And I sort of
Yeah.
identified with that relationship, right? Like there was sort of like an emotional dependency, um, and all of that, right? And that
Mhm.
just from I guess being young and kind of you know just ended up identifying with that, and then she broke up with me, and that was kind of like what the hell's going on? Like my world was like
Yeah.
flipped upside down,
Yeah.
um, and that was kind of the realization was like, hey, you got to be like all in on you. You have to have that relationship with yourself. You need to love yourself.
Yes.
Nobody's coming to save you, right? Um, so what are you going to do about it? Um, and that was kind of where, I went through a little bit of a tough time, but I always
Mhm.
had like a good sense of self, like all my life. So I knew I was always going to get back on track, but it was definitely like a wake up call for sure. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I got kicked in the face a little bit, and it's like, luckily I have like amazing family members and amazing friends and that like were able to help me during that time.
Mhm.
Um, but ultimately I had to do the work, right? I had
Right.
to do the work. And that's kind of where I really just got all in on it. Um, and then COVID came around,
Yeah.
and that kind of really, everything just stopped, right? And everybody was sitting at home, and um, you know, at that point, I was working in sales at like a lighting company,
Mhm.
and I kind of just stopped. And I was like, "What the hell am I doing?" Because I had plenty of time to think, and
And reflect. Yeah.
just we were sitting at home, like I was still working. Like fortunately, uh, they didn't let go of anybody, so like I kept my job, but still, you're home way more than you normally would be. You can't go out, you can't do anything. So like
Mhm.
I had plenty of time to think, and I was really still in that process of working on myself a lot. And I had, my mom's a physical therapy doctor, and she's been in business for
Mhm.
15 plus years, so she has a successful practice.
Mhm.
And I started to really kind of dig deep on like purpose and like all that kind of stuff. And in the middle of COVID, I was just like, Mom, I think I want to come work for you, right? And because
Yeah.
and in the middle of COVID, I left my job to go work for my mom, and so
Oh.
it was kind of a crazy move, but um, I knew that I had to do something where like I was going to be more into it, right?
Yeah.
And then having the family connection, and knowing that I was working for my mom, and what that would mean to her and what that would mean to me, to be able to, at least in some aspect, repay everything that my parents have been able to do for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, that drove me a lot more than anything else. And plus, it was in the physical therapy space, so there's exercise involved, right? And I love
Mm-hmm.
going to the gym, and going to the gym and working out was always something that like was kind of like my crutch, and like call it an escape maybe, where I was able to always
Right.
go and get some confidence, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, I kind of started putting everything together a little bit, and so that that was like a really important decision at that point in life for me.
Hello.
I'm here, yeah.
Okay. Sorry. You just
No, it's
cut
okay.
out from there.
Okay.
You're like you're able to go to the gym. You're working with your mom, and then from
Yep.
there, I guess the self-discovery
From there,
journey. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah. So from there, that kind of just it kind of helped me to just put everything together,
Yeah.
and it was a really important decision in my life, I would say, um, and it ended up being the absolute right decision.
Nice. So I want to go back just a little bit. When
For
you
sure.
started this journey of self-discovery, you had come out of a relationship, you're realizing that you need to have this like more of a connection with yourself. What did that look like for you? Especially for anyone who has gone through a breakup or is going through a breakup and is like learning to get back into the rhythm of being with themselves. How did you approach that?
Um, how did I approach that? I did a lot of reading, and like
Hmm.
I guess I did a lot of reading, and I tried to um, I wanted to see how strong I was, I guess, really. Like I wanted to see
Hmm.
what I could endure and what I could handle. Um,
Like in an emotional way?
yeah. Yeah, cuz
Okay.
I knew that that was certainly like a weak point for me.
Hmm.
Um, and I kind of wanted to test those limits and see like what 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 I was made of, and like how far, like how much could I grow and change. Um,
Yeah, that's cool.
and so I guess I just there was certain books that I would read, um, that kind of just would help me start thinking differently. And then
Hmm.
as I started to think differently, I, s- I started to like have some paradigm shifts and change my perspective on things, and
Hmm.
that was kind of the start of it. So I guess reading and learning and changing from like a negative mindset into a positive mindset, changing from like a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, like
Yeah.
just all those little shifts that I was able to make kind of really did start to get the ball rolling and make a difference.
And from that, you kind of were able to examine other areas of your life, it sounds like from your work as well, to shift into working with your mom and into the physical therapy. So that's like the beginning of, I guess, your trans or not. That was like the turning point of a more of a journey of self discovery.
Yes, for sure.
Would you say?
Yeah.
And what are you doing now? Are you still working with your mom?
So I'm not working with my mom anymore. I did work for her for like 3 years after that, and then, but in that process and in that time, I opened up my own LLC and called me like a personal trainer, but I became like a strength coach, strength and conditioning coach,
Mm-hmm.
and starting out, was doing working with adults, but now I predominantly work with kids and youth athletes in strength and conditioning,
Mm.
um, and really tying it all together to like, yes, this is sport performance training, and ultimately getting kids to move well, helping them get stronger, helping them get faster, giving them confidence, so that way when they go out on the field,
Mm-hmm.
they can perform their best. And I totally get that as a kid, right? Because you identify with your sport, whatever season it is you're
Right.
playing. That's where your confidence comes from. If you're a kid, right? A lot of it comes from like, hey, how am I doing in my sport? Did I play well
Right.
today? I know there's so many kids that can relate to that. Um, but ultimately, really, what it comes down to is this is the vehicle I really use to develop kids, because some of these things, like, I wish I knew about, you know what I could have done for myself in terms of my emotions and my mentality as a kid. That definitely, I think,
Mm-hmm.
would have absolutely helped me in sports. And so, like, yeah, we use this to help get better at sports, but it's really about developing better young boys and girls for sure.
Yeah, like developing the mindset, the emotional maturity, as well as the physical strength and conditioning.
Totally, yeah. Because I think, like, that's the hard part, right? Is
Yeah.
mental and emotional part of it. I think the physical part, if you're an athlete, that ends up becoming like pretty easy because you're so used to the
Right.
physical all the time. You're out there running, it's either hot or it's cold. If it's a contact sport, you're getting hit. Like, that's the easy stuff. But how do you go out there and, you know, control your emotions and your mindset and say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
you make a mistake, or hey, you lose a game, or hey, anything like that happens. Like, the physical part isn't really going to help you dealing with that. Like, how do you come back from that mentally and emotionally, either after the game or in the game, or, because it does
Yeah.
it does trickle down. Like, if you have a bad game, how do you go home? How do you treat your parents, and how do you treat your siblings? Or,
Yes.
like, if you're
No,
upset about your game,
exactly.
and you're mean to your like little sister because you're 14 and you, I don't know, missed the goal, or you threw an interception or something. Like, what are you going to go home and be mean to your little sister because you had a bad game? Like, you,
Yeah,
you, you can't. It does affect other areas of your life, even
totally.
as a kid. And how do you relay and convey that message to a kid? um
Yeah.
I
Well,
think there
also
is.
being a high school athlete and being in competitive sports, and when you're being really competitive, there's a lot of pressure that comes with that, and having to deal with all of the pressure of performing well, and if you lose, how do you cope? And I think, yeah, I don't see a lot of training for that, and maybe it's changed more now, and especially it sounds like with what you're doing. Can you speak more to that? Like maybe kind of what more of what you wish you knew then, and what the work you're doing now?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the biggest thing that I wish that I guess I knew was that it really is like, I have the ability to control, my attitude, my effort, and those are the things that are going to make the difference. You know,
Hmm.
if you show up with a bad attitude, right, that's not really going to help, right?
Right.
Like, you have to show up with a positive attitude, and you have to give great effort.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what I didn't know is how much that actually could make a difference, and it really does make a difference. Um, and I guess as a high schooler, you know, and even in college too, I guess I didn't really understand how big of an impact that could have.
And
You know,
when you were playing, did you just not even consider like, oh, this, like my mindset could shift, or I could be different if I, like, if you were having a bad reaction or whatever? Like, what was, like, I guess, like, what learnings did you take away from your own experience?
I, I would say that there's a difference between like, I look at, um, now I look at life like this as well, which I didn't at that time. Is like, you can either be in the game or you can be on the sideline, right? And
Hmm.
so like, if you're in the game, you're doing the work. You're out there. You're failing. You're, you know, open and able to receive the criticism if there is criticism, right? You're not pretending that you're in the game and you're just watching on the sidelines.
Yeah.
Um, and so a, a good example would be like when I'll use myself as this is a real example.
Hmm.
One of the things, so I was a receiver in college, and one of the things we used to do like one-on-ones, right, with the receivers
Hmm.
and DBs, and in one-on-ones, the defense, the corners and safeties, they would press you, right? So they were up right in front of your face, and it was physical. And not that I was ever afraid of contact or you know um, getting physical like that. I wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't one of my strengths, right? Was getting off like press coverage. Um, and so in one-on-ones, like I would kind of hide back because I didn't want to fail in front of everybody. I didn't want to like, you know,
Yeah.
make a mistake, or I didn't want to get, if I couldn't get off a line or I couldn't get into my route or anything like that. Like I would kind of hide in the back and I wouldn't get those reps. But the real learning would have been go up and take every rep against anybody, right?
Hmm.
That's where the learning would have came in, and I would have gotten so much better. But I didn't because I was afraid of what other people might think of me, right? Oh, is he not that
Hmm.
like he can't get all like and that judgment from either other teammates or coaches, and I was scared of that. And ultimately, even above that, I was scared of what the realization I thought of myself would have been, was like, hey, maybe I'm really not that good, you know?
Mm.
And like that was the one where
Self-judgment.
I didn't want to come to that realization.
Yeah.
Um, and so like, yes, what was I scared of the judgment of maybe coaches and other teammates? I was, but I was also scared of my own judgment, and that was probably
Yeah.
more crippling to why I wouldn't go out there and risk, right?
Yeah.
Um, or you would go and be like, oh no, I know I can go one-on-one here, and I know I'm going to win that matchup every time, right?
Hmm.
So then
Right.
those are the ones you would pick. But is that really helping you? No, it's not, especially as a player, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that was like my biggest learning, probably. So if I could go back and do it all over again, right, I would go and I would take all those reps, and
Yeah.
because now I'm more confident and self assured about who I am and like what you know about myself that I wasn't then. And to me, that was a huge mindset shift.
Yeah. Well, even hearing your story, it's like, you didn't take those reps maybe on the field, but you've definitely tried many other things, failed, and kept going. So
Yeah.
where do you think that came from?
Um, I guess just naturally being like resilient and like I was always a hard worker, right? So I was always going to work. I was always going to put the work in.
Hmm.
And so that's something I guess just came naturally to be able to do. Um, but I
Do you
also
feel like you had less of a fear of failure because football meant more to you, or playing sports meant more, or was it just like you kind of had those lessons already?
um, I think I was always okay because like sports, it like you're not always going to win. You're not going to make every play, and so like I naturally understood that, but you still got to play the game. Um, So like, I guess I was just accustomed to going out and working, and if you failed, you failed. But I guess I wouldn't risk as much, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Like I wouldn't be all in as much. If that makes sense and answers the question.
All in as much and like the outcome for like when you're trying to figure out your career.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then so now you're an entrepreneur, you started your own business. How has that shift been? And like what is your relationship to failure, success now that I mean, I've owned my own business before and I do so now. And I know there's everything falls on to you. So what is that like now when you're pushing to be successful, overcoming obstacles and everything like that?
Yeah, I think with that now, it's kind of, um, you're so used to doing everything on your own, and
Hmm.
so used to taking the mindset of, hey, this is on me. I'm taking the brunt of this, right? Uh,
Hmm.
I think currently for me, the biggest struggle that I have is kind of like not being able to understand that you need other people to help you, and I because I know that you need others to help you, right? You can't do everything alone.
Hmm.
So like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Whatever that
Right.
that saying is. Um, I just think it's the biggest struggle is like, okay, what can I let go of, right, and not be in
Hmm.
control now? Because now there is some sort of like, with that, if you're going to let other people along on the ride, you got to give up some control, right? And you want things
Yeah.
a certain way. So how do you feel comfortable in doing that, and maybe um, kind of just dealing with that? I would say that's probably what I'm fighting with a little bit the most currently.
That I think is the biggest conundrum of entrepreneurs because you're if to be an entrepreneur you're typically going to be an independent type of person, and then but then like you said you are going to go farther when you have a team behind you, so then learning how to work with other people, like kind of like give your baby to someone else or give parts of it for someone else to help, and even asking for the help, is that something that you find as difficult, or how do you kind of like seek out help, mentorship when it comes to running a business?
I think it's trust for sure. I think trust is a big one.
Mhm.
Trust, and which ultimately comes down to the quality of your relationships, I would say. Um, and so I think being able to develop quality relationships in that space with either a mentor or coworker or something, the stronger the
Mhm.
relationship, the easier it's going to be to trust that, hey, okay, I can leave this up to somebody else, or
Mhm.
you know do they have my best interest? I have their best interest, but do they have mine? And I think that just comes down to good communication, and you know, ha- genuinely wanting to have those good relationships, right?
Mhm.
And it does go both ways, right? Like that the other side has to also make those deposits into the relationship, right? And the more deposits that are being put into the relationship, the easier that becomes. But if it starts to get strained with more like withdrawals, right, then it
Mhm.
makes it harder. And I think it just takes like a lot of communication, and it takes time, and it takes effort. It's not easy work.
Yeah. No, totally. What have you learned about yourself now, having gone through all the things you've gone through, sort of like new shifts in identity, kind of like different changes in your career trajectory, um, from what I hear, being very resilient to change and changes in your path. What have you learned about yourself through all of this?
Um, that when I let my ego start talking, I'm worse off. So how do I
Mm.
continue to check my ego?
And what advice would you give to someone who maybe isn't even aware of the ego self and like isn't aware yet that they can separate from that?
I think that's a good question because I think the first step would just have to be to make them aware that the ego is a really like can be a really big deal. Um,
Yeah.
and then I guess one thing that's just really helped me a lot is journaling, um,
Cool.
and being able to just write out, what your thoughts are, what and just get it out. It doesn't have to be right, doesn't have to be wrong, it doesn't have to make
Right.
sense. You just write it, and
You don't have to
there's
read it to anyone, like no one's gonna read it.
yeah, no, you don't have to share it unless you want to share it, but you
Yeah.
don't have to share it. You don't have to share it at all. And I think that has just made me more self-aware because it was a way that
Mm.
like, I was never one to talk about my feelings or emotions, like I never did. But then once I started to write, that was like it was almost like a release. Like I was able to sort of get those things out. And the more I started to write, the more comfortable I felt opening up and talking.
Mm.
Um, and so, and then what the amazing thing about that is the more that you do it, you can go back and look at where you were versus where you are now. Like these are my thoughts.
Mhm.
These are what I was saying. And then you can look at that and be like, oh my God, I'm so far past that now. Like I've made
Yeah.
some growth. And that's what the amazing thing about it is. As my journaling journey has gone on, right? When I started, it was to be able to get those thoughts out and kind of clear and feel okay. But now it's more about like what am I writing getting out now that in maybe
Mhm.
6 months or a year, 2, 3 years from now, I can look back on and see like where was I at and where I am now. Like how can I
Yeah.
see what that path has been like, and that's been really cool to
That is
experience.
really cool. I'm sure that like really improves the relationship with yourself. Have you seen it improve your
Oh,
relationships with other people, like your friends, family?
totally, totally. Definitely has had a big impact on my relationship with myself for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, definitely. I think it's just helped improve my relationships all around because if I can improve myself, then I'm going to be able to improve my relationships with the other people around me in my life. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think as soon as you start improving your relationship with yourself, everything else kind of elevates as well.
That's really cool. So we've connected, right, through the Jay Shetty Coaching School.
Yeah.
Have you had a life coach before, or what drew you into this
Um, I've
course?
I've I have had a life coach before. Um,
Cool.
and I still work with one, right? Um,
Mhm.
what drew me into this course? I think you know because of my experience and a lot of what we've talked about. Um, I just think that this is so important, right?
Yeah.
Um, that I always wanted to implement like this type of stuff into my training, you know,
Mhm.
because I really do think it goes hand in hand. I think it goes hand in hand, and especially, for athletes who probably need help with that, right? And especially for kids too, because kids grow up in all different types of environments, and do they have the resources to be able to, you know, get this kind of training because it's not
Mhm.
really it's not really taught in school. You know, like I never learned
Mhm.
any of this stuff in school, and then I don't believe that they're probably still teaching any of this stuff in school, right?
Yeah.
Um, and as I started to progress my career a little bit here, I I don't want to end up being, you know, just a trainer or just a strength and conditioning coach. You know, not that there's anything
Right.
to that, because I certainly could do that the rest of my life because it's what I love to do, right? Um, but I just think there's a bigger purpose for me and a bigger role that I could play in helping people, and I thought that this was the best route to be able to make the biggest impact. It's also something that could separate me from other strength and conditioning coaches out there that, you know,
Mhm.
don't have the ability to be able to do these types of things and have these conversations. Um,
Mhm.
and so, because I think the physical and the mental are so closely related, um, that's kind of what led me to getting into the life coaching. And I also think that I'm more passionate about this stuff than the strength and conditioning side.
Yeah. Well, I love that you mentioned purpose because I feel like, again, finding motivation is also linked to doing purpose-driven work. So can
Mhm.
you speak more to that and like kind of uncovering purpose, working with student athletes or kids? What do you feel like what are you learning more about your purpose in this life and your career?
Um, I think part of the purpose is that like I'm genuinely still that kid that, you know, is an 11, 12, 13-year old that loves to play, wants to be out there competing, and like I'm genuinely still that kid. And
Mhm.
so that definitely gives me purpose to work with this demographic, and help guide them, because those are the parts of me as a kid that I didn't have developed, was that mental and emotional side of things that
Mhm.
into sports. um, and so I think that's kind of where the purpose comes in, is that I'm able to kind of hopefully be a guide and a mentor and someone that the kids could look up to, in a positive light, to just grow and develop in a positive way, to make a good impact. And I think, you know, that's what gets me out of bed every morning.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And you mentioned you'd worked with a life coach before. What was that like?
It it was great. It's great. I enjoy it. I
Uh-huh.
also like being coached, you know, because
Yeah.
I like the feedback. I like, um, you know, I like someone holding me accountable,
Mhm.
and you know, hopefully opening me up to new ideas and ways of seeing things, and you know, also learning from a coach who might have a different perspective that could cause me to maybe see something differently.
Mhm.
Because you know, when you play sports all your life, you're always being coached, right? And then
Right.
unless you work like unless you work in some job where you have a boss or a manager, or you know, like I guess you would say like they would be your coach, but that's just for your career, you know. uh,
Mhm.
and there's just more to it than being good at your job. um,
Yeah.
and so to have somebody be able to examine all of those other aspects of your life, from a non-judgmental, sort of unbiased way, um,
Mhm.
you know, is intriguing to me, because I'm always now looking for like, hey, what's the next thing that I could do to improve myself? What's like what is that?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important there to just have a guide, that's not either a friend or like a family member.
Yeah. No, it's I think it's huge that you mentioned feedback and that you are open to receiving feedback and wanting that and even like willing to give yourself feedback because I think with life coaching requires self-awareness and the willingness to receive feedback, which a lot of people don't have. So, can you speak to kind of the benefits of receiving feedback? And I also think this relates to the ego conversation, right? Because it's the ego that gets in the way when we're resistant to receiving feedback. So, can you kind of speak to how, like, receiving feedback and giving yourself feedback has helped in your journey?
Yeah, um I think to start, it's like, how do we view feedback?
Hmm.
And you could view it as either good or bad. But one thing I learned was to just view feedback as information.
Hmm.
And it's not good, it's not bad, it's just information. And what you do with that information is totally up to you. And I think having that perspective of feedback isn't good or bad, it's just information, has kind of certainly made me be able to accept bad feedback a lot easier, right?
Hmm.
And not to take it personally.
Right. And how do you like how what advice could you give to someone who is struggling with that, who wants the feedback but does take it personally or it hurts their feelings or is kind of afraid to step into that area because it is kind of like stepping into the dark and like not knowing what's there.
Yeah, I mean, I also do think part of it is like who's the person giving feedback and how they approach it too, right? That can,
Mhm.
because it could
Mhm.
come off really really bad. Um, However, the person receiving the feedback can't really control that sometimes, right? How
Mhm.
giving them the feedback. Um, but I think I would say if you are someone and somebody's giving you feedback, I would encourage, don't be reactive. Just listen.
Mhm.
You don't need to say anything. Um, just listen, whether it's good or bad, whether it hurts or not. And if it does hurt, kind of just sit with those feelings for a little bit, right? Because they'll sit
Mhm.
and be be attentive and be aware of, like, okay, when this person said X, where did I feel that? Or
Mm.
like, was that one that really hit me in the gut? That, because those really are the things that are going to make the change. That those are going to trigger something for you to take action. Like if somebody
Yeah.
says something to you and they hit you where it hurts, you're going to remember that.
Right.
And if it's strong enough, it's going to cause you to make a change. And at the end of the day, that's probably a good thing. It's probably a good thing. Um, and so, that would be my first advice. Probably is just don't be reactive to it. Just
Mhm.
sit, listen to it, be aware of where you feel it, and then if then really kind of assess the feedback. And if you're like, yeah, that's okay, be able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, yeah, that's right. And if it is right, okay, now that's good. It ended up being a good thing. And if it's not, then that's you know that's okay. And just say, all right, yeah, I hear you. If you don't actually believe it, then you don't believe it. But it's still good to know that, hey, the way I'm being could come off as a certain way, which is why somebody might say that to me. So if anything, it just helps bring good awareness.
Yes, the self-awareness and being open to it. That's just like the beginning too of the ego work and understanding our triggers and not being so reactive towards it. Because everyone goes through that.
Yeah.
If your younger self could see you now, what do you think he would say?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think I think if my younger self could see me now, I think, you know my younger self would end up looking at who I am now and saying that's where I want to be or that's where I want to go.
Mm.
And I feel like for me that was always the goal was that it's good to have role models and all that. The person I always wanted to look up to was my future self. Like how can I, you know,
Yeah.
and so, I my younger self would be like, oh, that's who I'm gonna end up being. All right, that's pretty cool, you know.
Yeah.
But what I would say to the younger self is that you don't just end up being that way. You have to do a lot of work, and it is about, your habits and the choices that you make, um, and if you consistently do those things, you'll get there.
Yeah. I think it's really wise to see yourself as the role model for your younger self. I
Certainly, yeah,
think like there's so much now, especially on the internet, about like inner child work and shadow work and all these things. But even like we are younger versions of our future selves now. And so kind of tapping into that wisdom of where we want to be can always help us in the present moment to like take those next steps.
yeah. And I think it's a really good spot to be in, um, and I think it's a good driver too. Um,
Hmm.
to want to be able to look up to your future self, because
Hmm.
it's gonna, yeah, kind of just bringing it back to the awareness, allow you to make those decisions to kind of go in the direction that you want to go.
Yeah. What final words of wisdom do you have for anyone who's uncertain in their path and maybe reluctant to try new things or put themselves out there, who may be afraid of failure or maybe wants to like start their own business but not sure how to take that next step?
Um, the one thing I would say is, take accountability for yourself, and that,
Hmm.
like, really, no, it all starts with you, right? And nobody's really
Yeah.
going to come and save you.
Yeah.
And just, you got to start. You got to start. It doesn't matter what the first step is. You just got to start, because if you start, then it's really all in your way of being. So if
Hmm.
you change how you be, you know things are going to happen for you a little bit differently, right? And so that would be it. It's all start with yourself. No, it's all take
Hmm.
take accountability for yourself, take accountability for your actions, focus on what you can control, and
Hmm.
and honestly, just like have fun in the process, right? Like,
Hmm.
that's another thing that I always think about. Like, if you're not having fun, then I don't know, what are you doing? Everything, it's supposed to be fun a little bit, and fun could be defined, many many different ways. Just fun doesn't always mean, laughing, having a good time. Like, part of the fun is the work, is the grind,
Hmm.
right? Um,
Exactly.
and so if you're having fun, things are going to be much more enjoyable. You're going to be able to endure more if you're having fun, um,
Yep.
and focus on those relationships that you have in your life with people.
Yeah.
That's gonna help you too.
And I think the part about fun is so true because fun doesn't necessarily mean easy, and especially to relate it to being an athlete, training isn't always fun, but winning is really fun. And so when you do the work and kind of like the muscle memory is there and the skill set is there, the fun comes out of all of the hard work.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Awesome. Awesome, Rockne. That was a great conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. I feel very grateful that
Thank
you had
you.
me on.
Thank you for being on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and join us in our next conversation where we'll be exploring the extraordinary lives of ordinary people. I'm Courtney Lofton, and this is Ordinary Eccentrics.